Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Bokerman. Today's video is going to teach you how to actually solve by factoring. Okay, so the last unit that we covered, it was just straight up factoring. And this unit, you're actually going to have to solve. So the biggest thing I can show you is this difference, this example I have right here, where it says x squared plus 2x minus 3 versus x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. So in the first example, all you have to do is factor and be done. But as soon as I attach an equals 0, I'm now looking for all possible answers for x. So your answers are going to be more what you like, as like x equals 5 or things like that. Okay, so we're going to use factoring to actually solve. There's a lot of different methods. This is the first one, and it only works when it actually factors, which all of the ones I'm going to give you are going to be able to be factored. If it can't be factored, we'd called it prime. However, when you're solving, there are other answers and there's different ways to find what those answers are, which we'll show you in later videos. So the first thing is I'm going to kind of walk you through the steps for factoring. So step number 1 is you need to make sure that the equation is actually equal to 0. You cannot factor unless everything is on the same side. Okay, so you didn't have to worry about that when there wasn't an equal sign, but now I'm going to put things on this side and you're going to have to move them over and make sure it's equal to 0 first. So we're going to start off easy. That one already is there. So then the second step is, like with factoring, you need to take out a GCF if there is one. If there isn't one, then you can just skip to the next one. So I look and I see a 3, a 14, and a 49, and no, they don't have any numbers in common, so there is no GCF to take out. The third step is to factor, is to make your two parentheses like you would normally, and consider what goes in the first spot and what goes in the last spot. This is going to take you the bulk of the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and start factoring. So I look at this and I see a 3. So the only way to multiply to get 3 is nicely a 3 and a 1. Since my last term is negative, I have one of those plus minus situations, so I'm not really sure which one's going to be the plus and which one's going to be the minus. So then I look at 49, and that's kind of a big number, but what's common with 49 is it's generally a 7 and a 7. So I'm going to put those there, and then I'm going to check. So you can see I'm going to check my loops. 3 times 7 is going to be 21x, and 7 times 1 is going to be 7x, and I'm trying to get 14. And so I want a plus 14, which means I want the bigger number to be positive and the smaller number to be negative. So the 21 came from 3 times 7. So this has to be the plus, and that has to be the minus, which is what I got. Okay, so when you were factoring before, you just factored and you stopped. But now, because it's an equal 0, now you're going to apply what you should have learned in the last video, which was the zero product property. So now you're going to set each of your factors equal to 0 and actually solve for an x value. So I'm going to set the 3x minus 7 equal to 0 and the x plus 7 equal to 0. And I'm going to solve. So to solve this one, I'm going to add 7 to both sides. And then I have to divide by 3. So my answer is 7/3. You can give me the decimal if you want. Doesn't matter. And then over here, to get x by itself, I would just subtract 7 to both sides, and there's my two answers. So those are my two answers. So I factor, and then I apply the zero product property to get my both answers. So let's try another one. Let's go through the steps. I need to make sure that everything is on the same side. So if you see on this one, I now have this 76x over here. And I put this off to the side because it has to go in order. You cannot factor unless everything's in the right order. It has to go in standard form, meaning the x squared has to come first, then the x's have to come second, and the constants or the numbers have to come last. So this 76x needs to squeeze in between the x squared and the number. So I need to move it over, which means I actually need to subtract it over. So when I do that and squeeze it in, this is what I'm going to factor. Now, those look like very big numbers to me. So step number 2 says, what is their GCF? They're all even, so that should be a hint. Then I could take out a 2. So when I divide everything by 2, 14 divided by 2 is 7. 76 divided by 2 is 38, and 48 divided by 2 is 24. And now that's a lot smaller to factor. So now I'm thinking about 24 And the first thing I'm going to think about is the 7. So how can I get 7? There's only one way. It's got to be 7 and 1. And notice this 2 is just coming along for the ride. You can't get rid of it. It's just got to stay there. Okay. Now I want to think about 24. There's lots of options for 24, 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. When I have 24, I generally like to try either the 3 and the 8 or 4 and 6 first, and that's just a random guess. So let's try 3 and 8 and see what happens. So if I put the 3 there and the 8 there, I'm going to get 7 times 3 is 21. 8 times 1 is 8, and I'm supposed to try to get a 38. And 21 and 8, there's no way I'm going to get a negative 38. If I switch it, then I would put an 8 here, and what would happen is I would do 7 times 8, which is 56. It's a huge number. I'm going to be nowhere near 38. So I'm actually going to not try 3 and 8, and I'm going to try the next one. I'm going to try 4 and 6. Okay? So if I try 4 and 6, let's check to see what would happen. 7 times 6 is actually 42, and 4 times 1 would be 4. But I am trying to get a negative 38, which I actually can do. If this was negative and I added 4, I would be at negative 38. So 42 came from the 7 times the 6. So this is where the minus is, and this is where the plus sign is. And we actually figured it out. Boom. Okay. Now, once you get the answer, you're not done. Now is when you need to do the zero product property, and I need to set each of my factors equal to 0. Now, I hope that you can see I'm actually not setting the 2 equal to 0, because 2 equals 0, that doesn't make any logical sense. There has to be an x that means for me to solve for it. So the only thing I'm going to do is set the 7x plus 4 equal to 0 and the x minus 6. I'm going to solve it. This one, I'm going to add 4 or subtract 4 because it is being added, and then divide by 7. You can, again, give the decimal or leave it. And then for the last one, I'm just going to add 6 over. And so my two answers are x is 6 and x is negative 4 over 7. Generally, with quadratics, you're going to have 2 answers most of the time. Let's try. I'm going to do 5 total. So here's number 3. Same thing again. I need my answers to be in order. This one has a cube, then an x squared. So this one has x, so it's going to go on the end right here so that it goes in order, 3, 2, 1. Okay, because it's minus 16, I'm actually going to add it to the other side. And now I have it equal to 0. So that's step number 1. Make sure everything's on the same side in order. Step number 2 is see if there's a GCF. And this one actually has one because you cannot factor unless it's a quadratic. So this is a cube. We don't know how to factor those yet. So you have to, each one has an extra x, and 4, 20, 16. They all have a 4 you can take out. Okay, so I'm going to take out a 4. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. 20 divided by 4 is 5. And 16 divided by 4 is 4. And I'm going to take an x from each of them, which makes it an x squared, a 5x, and a 4. Now this is much simpler to factor. So factoring, how can you get a 1x squared, x and x? How can I get a 4? There's actually 2 ways, 2 and 2, which is what I would have tried. But that's only going to get me 2x, and 2x is only going to get me a 4x, and I need to get a 5. So another way to get 4 is to do 4 and 1, and that actually is going to give me 5, because I would do x times that. That's 1x. That's going to be 4x. That is going to be 5x. So now I've factored, and now I'm going to set each of my factors equal to 0. And if you notice, this time I did set the number, the GCF out in front, equal to 0 because it had an x. So 4x equals 0, x plus 4 equals 0, and x plus 1 equals 0. So my 3 answers are 0, negative 4, and negative 1. And I had 3 answers this time because I started with a cubic. Okay, that's why I ended up with 3. All right, number 4. Now, I need to move everything to the over, this part of it, but this time there's also a little thing to combine, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the 3x over because it's being subtracted. And when I do that, I'm going to squeeze it in between the 2x and the 10. But at the same time, I have to subtract 4, but there's already a number over here. So in reality, I actually have to combine the -10 and the -4. So before I even start, if I want to add the 3x over and subtract 4, my problem turns into 2x squared plus 3x minus 14. Now I can factor. So now it's equal to 0. I check GCF. I have a 2 and a 3 and a 14. Nothing in common. So then I go to make my two parentheses. The only way to get 2 is 2 and 1, so that's easy. Now I'm looking at 14, and I can either do 1 and 14 or 7 and 2. I'm most likely going to try 7 and 2. And recall that I'm not going to put the 2 here because putting a 2 next to a 2 would have implied a GCF. So I'm going to try 7 first and see if that works. So if I want to put a 7 here, then the 2 times 2 gives me 4, and 7 times x gives me 7, and I'm trying to get 3. And I can get 3 if the 7 was positive and the 4 was negative. So the 4 came from the 2 by 2, and the 7 is going to be positive. So that is how it factors. And after you factor, this should be the easy part. Now I'm just setting each of them equal to 0, and I'm solving. So 2x plus 7, subtract 7, divide by 2, and then x minus 2, all I got to do is add 2 over. So those are my two answers. And again, you could give me the decimal if you wanted, or you can give me the fraction. All right, last problem. Here's a doozy. There's so much going on over here. Okay, so the first thing is I need to move everything over, but I already have things that are similar. So I'm going to add 2x over, but notice I'm going to put them underneath my 4x squared that I already have. I'm going to subtract 27 over, and I'm going to put it underneath the -15 I already have. And I have a plus 8, so I'm going to add that over, or subtract it over, so I'm going to put it underneath the 80 I already have. So if I do all of that, I end up with 4 and 2 makes 6, -15, -27 makes -42, and 80 minus 8 is positive 72. Whew, so a lot of work. You gotta make everything equal to 0 first and combine like terms if needed. Now I'm going to do GCF. I see a 6, a 42, and a 72. They're all divisible by 2, but more higher than that is actually a 6. So if I divide everything by 6, 6 divided by 6 is 1. 42 divided by 6 is 7, and 72 divided by 6 is 12. Remember, you want to take out the highest because it'll make your life easier when you're trying to factor, because these are much smaller numbers to work with. So now the 6 is just going to stay out front, and I'm trying to get x squared, so it's got to be x times x. Notice my last term is positive, which means my symbols are going to be the same. So I know that both of my symbols are going to be a minus minus. Because this is positive, my symbols have to be the same. Because this is negative, they're both negative. Okay. So now here we go. I'm going to try 12, 4, and 3. So if I do that, a -4 and a -3 will absolutely give me -7. So now all I have to do is set each of them equal to 0. Notice I, again, don't set the 6 equal to 0 because that doesn't make any sense. Okay. You only set things equal to 0 that have x's. Okay. So I have x minus 4 equals 0 and x minus 3. So I'm going to add 4 and add 3, and those are my two answers. Okay, so really, if you were good at factoring, that's great. That's a huge part of it. Once you factor, it's now just setting them each equal to 0. Okay, so now your job is to practice and try some homework. Good luck.